Wyoming Territory, June 1876. The wagon wheel cracked loud against the rock, but the sound that followed was worse. Her stepfather's voice, low and mean, saying, "She's no use anymore, leave her." Hollis Fairburn hit the hard, packed earth with her shoulder first, then her hip. The breath rushed out of her lungs as the wagon creaked on without stopping. Dust filled her mouth, her ears, her eyes. The sun blazed overhead, cruel and high, and by the time she rolled onto her back, the wagon train was no more than a smear on the prairie horizon. She lay still in the tall grass, body aching, ribs screaming. A tear rolled into her hairline. She had always known they did not want her, but she had not thought they would do this. The heat dragged on. Insects buzzed, blood dried on her lip from where she had hit her mouth. Hours passed, or maybe it was a day. Everything blurred into pain and sky. She could not move her left leg. Her skirt clung damp to her thigh where blood had soaked through. It was nearly dusk when she heard the horse. The rhythm of hooves was slow, careful. She held her breath. Her fingers curled into the dirt. She had nothing to defend herself with. If it were another man like her stepfather, the horse stopped. "Sweet hell," a voice said, low and rough. "You alive, miss?" She turned her head barely. A man dismounted, quick boots thudding the ground. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a sun-browned face and wide shoulders. His eyes were sharp blue and full of worry. His hat cast a shadow over his brow, but she could still see the kindness in his face. "I am not," her throat rasped. "I cannot move my leg." "I see that," he said, already kneeling beside her. "Name's Nolan Ridge. Let me help. I ain't gonna hurt you." She flinched when he touched her arm, but he paused. "I swear it, miss. You are safe." "Hollis," she whispered. "My name is Hollis Fairburn." He nodded once, then looked her over with quiet focus. His hands were steady as he checked her leg. His jaw tightened. "Broken," he said. "Clean break, though. You were lucky." "I do not feel lucky, fair." He gave her a small smile. "But you are alive. That counts for something." He moved with care, lifting her like she weighed nothing, settling her across his saddle while he led the horse by the reins. She bit down on her pain, not making a sound. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting long gold shadows across the grass. They reached a small cabin tucked near a stream before full dark. He carried her inside and set her gently on a cot near the fire. The room was simple but clean: wooden floor, a table with a lantern, a few iron pots stacked near the hearth. "I live alone," he said, as if he needed to explain it. "Just me and the horse. No one will bother you here." She wanted to ask why he was helping her, but her throat burned. He knelt beside her again, this time with a cloth and a basin of water. "Let me clean you up," he said. "You got blood on your side." She let him. His touch was careful as he dabbed at the dried blood, peeling back the cloth of her dress to check the wound. Her breath hitched when cool water touched her skin. "You will be all right," Nolan murmured. "We will get you healed up." His eyes flicked to hers. "Well, I found you in the grass, did I not? Seems I am part of this now." She blinked at him, confused by the warmth that stirred in her chest at his words. He set a blanket over her after tending her leg, which he braced with splints and tied tight. She drifted in and out through the night, waking once to find him sitting near the fire, watching her quietly. In the morning, the pain in her leg was sharp and unforgiving. But she was alive. And Nolan was still there, handing her a cup of water, his eyes soft. "How long was I out there?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Long enough," he said gently. "But not too long." She drank. That day he cooked eggs and beans and fed her slowly, making sure she could swallow. He did not ask questions she could not answer. When she was strong enough to speak, she told him the truth. "My stepfather threw me from the wagon. He said I slowed them down. I think," her voice broke, "I think they were glad to be rid of me." He did not interrupt. He just listened, jaw tight. "I have no one left," she whispered. "You have me," he said, quiet but firm, her eyes filled. "Why?" "Because I saw you, and because I know what it is to be left behind." She reached for his hand without thinking. He let her take it. Days passed. He built a crutch for her. He helped her sit up, then stand. She leaned on him when she could not bear weight. He never rushed her, never treated her like a burden. One night she stood near the window, looking out at the stars. He came to stand beside her. "You are healing fast," he said. "Because of you," she said. "I would have died out there." He looked at her then, really looked. I am glad I found you, Hollis. She turned to face him. So am I. Something passed between them in the silence. His hand brushed hers. She did not pull away. She stepped closer, his breath caught. She reached up, touched the edge of his jaw. You are the first person who ever looked at me like I mattered, she said. You do, he said, voice rough. You do? Then she kissed him. It was soft, hesitant, but true. He kissed her back like he had been waiting for it, his hand pressing gentle against her back. When they parted, she was breathless. I did not mean for this to happen, she said. Neither did I, he said, but I am not sorry for it. Neither was she. And though the prairie wind howled outside the cabin walls, inside everything felt still and sure. Rain came the next morning. A steady drizzle, not enough to flood the creek, but enough to soften the earth and paint the cabin roof with its quiet rhythm. Holly sat at the table near the stove, her leg eased out beneath a wool blanket Nolan had placed there before starting breakfast. He moved without hurry, sleeves rolled to his elbows, pan hissing as he turned the salt pork. Did you build this place yourself? She asked, voice still a little raw from sleep. He glanced over his shoulder. Took me 2 winters. Started with just the frame and tarp over it the first year. I'd work cattle in the warm months, save what I could. Didn't have much, but I liked knowing each board was where I set it. She nodded slowly, fingers tracing the grain in the tabletop. The beam above the hearth's got a notch in it, like where a rifle might rest. It's where my father kept his old Spencer, Nolan said, lifting the pan off the fire. He passed when I was 17, but I remembered how he'd lean it there when he came in from hunting. Felt right to carve the same notch. He set a plate in front of her, then sat across the table. Neither of them spoke as they ate. The quiet between them had changed since the kiss, not strained, but watchful, as if both were adjusting to a new shape neither had expected. After she finished, she folded her hands in her lap. You said you know what it is to be left behind. He looked at her, then down at his plate. My ma died birthing my sister. My father raised us, but he drank hard after that. When I was old enough, I took my sister and left. She didn't make it through the first hard winter, fever. His voice didn't break, but he held it tight. After that, it was just me. Hollis didn't offer comfort. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He didn't move, just let her fingers rest there, warm against his skin. I want to help, she said. With what? He asked, brow lifting faintly. Whatever you do each day. I can't walk far, but I can mend or slice beans or feed the horse if you show me where the grain is. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. You don't owe me that, I know, she said, but I want to do it anyway. Outside, the rain slowed. A few birds called through the trees near the creek. Nolan rose and fetched a pair of worn gloves from a peg by the door. There's a sack of dried corn needs sorting. Weevils got into the last batch, and I don't want them taking this one too. I'll bring it to you, she nodded, already pushing her empty plate aside. He set the sack beside her and she began her work, fingers nimble despite the swelling in her ankle. He watched her for a moment, then stepped out into the drizzle to tend the animals. She lost herself in the rhythm of the task, sorting the kernels into a second bowl, brushing aside husks and bits of grit. Her body still ached, but the pain was becoming manageable, something she could work around. When Nolan returned, his shirt damp and his hat dripping, her bowl was nearly full. I'd say you saved near half the sack, he said, crouching beside her to inspect the kernels. That's more than I expected. She gave him a small smile. I don't like feeling useless. You aren't, he said, standing again. Let me show you something. He led her to the doorway, letting her lean on his arm. From there, she could see past the cabin to the slope beyond, where rows of young corn pushed up from the earth. Didn't plant them but 3 weeks ago, he said. They've taken well. She leaned against the frame. It's peaceful here. It is. His gaze lingered on the hill. But sometimes it can feel like the world forgot this place exists. She turned her head toward him. Maybe that's not always a bad thing. He looked at her then, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper, something that held both the ache of everything he'd lost and the quiet hope of what he might still keep. That night, she sat beside him on the porch as the last light faded. Her crutch rested nearby, unused for now. His hand brushed hers again, and she let their fingers rest together in the dark. "You're not alone anymore," she said, voice steady. He looked at her. "Neither are you." They stayed like that until the stars blinked out above them, the breeze carrying the smell of wet earth and something else, something new and unfolding. By midsummer, the prairie grasses had thinned under the sun, and the days stretched long enough to dry the laundry faster than Hollis could pin it. She stood barefoot on the flat stone near the well, skirt hem brushing her ankles, and wrung out the last shirt Nolan had washed that morning. Her arms ached pleasantly, her hands rougher now than when she'd first come. The skin along her knuckles had toughened. She didn't mind. Nolan was in the shed, hammering slats onto a new storage bin for the corn. The rhythmic beat of his work reached her in steady echoes. He had taken to whistling under his breath when he worked, a low tune she didn't recognize but had come to expect. She hung the shirt and stepped back, surveying the line. A breeze tugged the fabric, lifting the scent of soap and sun-warmed cotton. She turned toward the shed. "Will those hold through the winter?" she asked, walking slowly across the yard with her crutch. He paused to push his hair from his forehead. "They ought to. I'm using fur on the inside, doesn't rot easy." She leaned on the door frame, watching him fit another board. The inside of the shed smelled of sawdust and old leather. "Do you ever trade in town?" "Once a month," he said, glancing up. "Dry goods mostly. I keep a few hides aside for Tanner McGill. He makes harness work." She hesitated. "Next time you go." "Could I come?" Nolan straightened, dusting his palms. "It's a rough ride." "Wagon tracks rutted most of the way." "I know," she said, "but I'd like to walk among folks again, even if I don't speak to them." He studied her. "You sure you're ready?" "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't." He nodded slowly, then looked toward the horses. "We'll go day after tomorrow. I'll fix up a cushion for the bench." She glanced at the corner of the shed where a few stitched horse blankets were folded. "What kind of town is it?" "Small." "A church, a post, a few stores. Doc comes once a week from Rollins. Folks keep to themselves." She stepped inside, resting her weight against the wall. "Do they know you?" "Some." "I don't give them much reason to ask questions." She watched him rub linseed into the wood, the muscles in his forearm flexing with each pass. "Will they ask about me?" His hand slowed. "Likely." She waited. "I'll tell them you're mine," he said without looking up. Her throat tightened. "Do you want that?" He set down the cloth and came to stand in front of her. "I've wanted a great many things I never spoke aloud, but yes, if you'll have it, I want that." She looked at his chest, then higher, meeting the quiet in his gaze. "Then you already have it." When he kissed her, it was different than before, not hesitant, but steady and sure. His hand came to her waist, anchoring her. She pressed her fingers to his jaw, feeling the faint scratch of stubble grown from days spent too busy to shave. They stood like that for a long moment, the air between them warm with sawdust and summer. Later, while he hitched the wagon, she sat on the porch, sewing a new hem into the sleeve of his only good shirt. She didn't tell him, but she planned to wear her mother's brooch to town, the one she'd kept hidden in her boot even after being thrown from the wagon. She hadn't looked at it since, hadn't wanted to remember, but tonight it felt like something worth carrying forward. That evening, after the last of the chores, they sat near the fire with the map he kept folded inside a Bible. She traced the road with her finger. "You ever think about going farther?" she asked. He leaned back in the chair, one boot resting across the other. "I used to, thought maybe Idaho. Then the war happened. After that, I just wanted quiet." She looked up. "And now," he took a long breath, "now I think a quiet life might be worth building if I'm not building it alone." They didn't speak after that, but she reached across the table and took his hand. Not because she was afraid of being alone again, she wasn't, but because she knew now what it felt like to be chosen. Not out of duty, not out of pity, but because someone saw her and stayed. The wind rose outside, catching the edge of the roof. Nolan stood to stoke the fire and check the latch on the door. When he returned, he paused beside her chair. "You'll need rest for the ride," he said. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Come with me." His hesitation was brief. He nodded once, then helped her up, his hand gentle at her back. The bed creaked as they lay down, the lantern burning low. She curled beside him, her head near his shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't move to draw her close. He didn't need to. They were already there. The wagon rocked gently as they followed the narrow trail eastward, cottonwood limbs bowing over the road in spindled shade. Hollis sat beside Nolan, a folded quilt cushioning the pine bench beneath her. She kept her hands folded in her lap, the brooch pinned just beneath her collar, its gold edges warm against her skin. The air smelled of sage and dry grass, and somewhere off to the north, a hawk cried. Nolan kept one hand light on the reins, the other resting against his thigh. His hat brim shaded his face, but she could see the quick flick of his eyes along the trail, always reading the land ahead. "How often do you speak to the others in town?" she asked, her voice quiet beneath the creak of the wagon. "Not much beyond what's needed," he said. "They'll nod if you do. And if you don't, they won't press." She watched a jackrabbit dart into the brush. "I don't need them to speak to me," he glanced over. "You don't?" They passed a low rise, the town unfolding below like a worn quilt building scattered in a crooked line, paint faded, roofs patched with tar paper or scrap tin. Smoke lifted from a chimney behind the mercantile, and a horse stood tied to the post outside the smithy, its flanks twitching at flies. Nolan pulled the wagon to a stop beside a low hitch rail. "You want to come in with me or wait here?" "I'll come," she said, shifting her weight carefully as he stepped down and offered his hand. She took it without hesitation. Inside the store, the scent of flour and oiled wood hung in the air. A tall, narrow man looked up from behind the counter. His beard was trimmed neat and his sleeves rolled to the elbow. "Morning, Ridge," he said. "Got that cornmeal in?" Nolan nodded. "Appreciate it, Clyde." The man's eyes flicked to Hollis, but he didn't comment. She kept her chin level, her hand wrapped around Nolan's arm. No one stared. No one whispered. It was a kind of mercy she hadn't expected. They picked through the shelves to gather salt, lamp wicks, a small tin of lye soap. Nolan didn't rush her. When she paused to look at a bolt of blue calico, he waited. "You want it?" he asked, voice low. "I was only remembering," she said. "My mother had a dress like that once. Still some left on the bolt," he said. "Enough for you to have one too." She met his eyes. "I don't need it. Doesn't mean you can't have it." He placed the fabric on the counter with the rest. Outside, the breeze had picked up. They walked the wagon down to the post office, where a barrel-chested man in a canvas vest sorted letters behind a narrow window. "Any for Ridge?" Nolan asked. "Let's see." The man shuffled through a stack. "Nothing since April." Nolan thanked him and turned to Hollis. "We'll stop at the Smith's next. I need a new strap for the plow rig." She followed him around the corner where the forge clanged and hissed. The blacksmith, a middle-aged woman with soot on her cheeks, looked up from the anvil and gave Nolan a nod. "You've let your gear go too long again," she said. "I know, that last frost cracked the leather." The woman glanced at Hollis, then back to Nolan. "She yours?" He didn't flinch. "She is," the blacksmith grunted. "Good, you needed someone to keep you from turning to stone." Hollis raised a brow, but Nolan only smiled faintly and leaned to examine the harness. They left town with the wagon bed heavier and the light slanting westward. Hollis rested her head against the side rail as they rolled past the last fence line. "You've lived close to people," she said, "but kept them far. They had their lives, I had mine. And now," he kept his eyes on the trail. "Now I think maybe there's a third thing ours." She looked at the land, at the dry creek beside the road and the hills beyond. "Do you think it'll last?" "I think if we want it to, we'll keep building it. Like the cabin, one beam at a time." She reached for his hand and held it there atop the brake lever, her fingers threading between his. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. They reached home just as the sky softened into dusk, the wind quieting, the chickens rustling low in the coop. Nolan unloaded the supplies while Hollis lit the lamp and set water to boil. They moved around one another easily now, like two notes in the same song. Later, after the fire had burned low and the stew was finished, Hollis stood by the doorway, watching the stars rise. "I never thought peace would feel like this," she said. Nolan came to stand behind her, his hand resting at her hip. "Like what?" "Like something I could hold in both hands." He wrapped his arms around her, drawing her back against his chest. "Then hold it," he said, "because it's yours now. And I'm not going anywhere." She leaned into him, her eyes on the wide, dark sky. The wind stirred the grass outside, soft as breath. Behind them, the cabin glowed with firelight. Ahead, the prairie stretched quiet and open, waiting. The first frost came early that year, crisping the edges of the pasture grass and silvering the eaves of the cabin before dawn. Holly stirred beneath the quilt, her leg warm against Nolan's. The fire had burned low, but not out. She could hear the wind pressing soft against the shutters. "You awake?" Nolan's voice was rough with sleep. "I am now." He shifted beside her, and she felt the weight of his arms slide across her waist. "Ground'll be hard by midday." "I'll bring the squash in before it freezes." "I'll help with the slicing," she said, her breath forming a faint cloud in the cool air. "That new knife you bought in town has a good weight to it." He kissed her shoulder and pulled back the covers. "I'll get the stove going." They moved through the morning in tandem, not with the carefulness of newness, but with the practiced grace of shared habit. Holly's laid out a cloth on the table, her hands already reaching for the bowl where she'd left the last of the salt. Nolan came in with a crate of squash, boots muddy, his breath clouding the air. By afternoon, the cabin filled with the scent of roasting flesh and wood smoke. Holly stood by the window, drying her hands on the apron she'd sewn from the leftover calico cloth. The fields beyond the ridge had turned brittle gold, the leaves along the creek running rust red. "You remember that land east of the tree line?" Nolan asked, pulling off his gloves. "The slope with the wild currants," he nodded. "I've been thinking of breaking ground there come spring. Good sun. Could plant potatoes, maybe beans." She folded her arms, watching him. "You planning to do all that alone?" "I'm planning to do it with you." She smiled, the kind that stayed in her eyes. "Then I'd say you've got a solid plan." That evening, Nolan brought in a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and handed it to her without a word. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a book bound in worn leather. The pages inside were blank. "I thought maybe you'd write in it," he said, "if you wanted." "For yourself." Her fingers trembled just slightly as she touched the spine. "I haven't written anything since I was a girl. Then it's about time you did again." She pressed the book to her chest. "You always know what to give me. I watch close," he said simply. The days grew shorter, and they fell into a rhythm marked by the sound of splitting wood, the hush of snow at night, and the slow boil of stews that lasted days. Holly's read aloud sometimes, pausing to let the words settle between them. Nolan kept whittling, his hands always shaping something from what others would have burned. One night, as they sat wrapped together by the hearth, she said, "I've been thinking." He looked at her, his thumb brushing slow across her wrist. "I want to marry you," she said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, crossed the room, and opened the drawer where he kept his father's pocketknife, his sister's comb, a small scrap of blue ribbon. From beneath the cloth, he drew out a ring, simple silver, with a small flat stone set flush to the band. "I was waiting for the right time," he said, coming back to her. "But maybe I was just waiting for you to say it first." She held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. They married 2 mornings later, just the two of them out by the creek, with breath rising in the cold and the cottonwoods bare above them. Nolan spoke clear and steady, his hand wrapped around hers. Holly's answered with no tremble in her voice. Afterward, they walked back to the cabin, fingers laced, boots crunching over the frozen grass. There was no feast, no guests, only a pot of beans on the stove and a sky so clean it hurt to look at. Years passed. They planted the eastern field and it took. The potatoes came up strong and the beans climbed well past the stakes Nolan carved. Holly's kept the journal, filling it with recipes, seed notes, and lines of poetry she never read aloud. They built a second room onto the cabin, then a shed for drying herbs. Nolan taught a neighbor's boy how to mend harnesses, and Holly's took in mending for trade, a spool of thread here, a jar of honey there. The land gave back what they put into it. One spring morning, Nolan came in from the fence line with a letter in his hand. The post had changed hands again, and someone had delivered a letter meant for Holly's. A cousin in Illinois she hadn't known was still alive. The woman wrote kindly, with news of a new child and a wish to see her once more. Holly's read it, then tucked it into a drawer. That night she told Nolan, "I'm glad to know there's someone left. You want to go?" he asked. She shook her head. I've already found my home. They grew older. Nolan's hair thinned and the lines around Holly's eyes deepened, but their hands never stopped meeting in the quiet. They never stopped reaching for each other across the years. On their 30th winter together, Nolan carved her a comb from juniper, and Holly's knit him a scarf the color of the sky before snow. They sat in the doorway, side by side, watching the creek run free again after the thaw. I still look at you the same, he said. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. I still feel it, and the prairie, wide and golden, held them in its long, quiet arms.